Welcome to episode 116 of the Hard Truth About B2B E-commerce. I'm back with our co-host Tim after like a week or two. The holidays have kind of messed everything up, so I can't keep track of which weeks we missed. But
the holidays have been come and gone, and they were wonderful. And this past week too, I was also at the NRF, the National Retail Federation conference, where they had 40,000 people show up for the conference this year. It was massive. I'm exhausted just thinking, still thinking about
just being there.
Just being there, but it was great. I bumped into a load of industry people, a lot of B2B people, e-commerce.
It's your backyard, right? That's an easy one for you, right?
Like you just
take the train, right?
Yep, I just take the train, go there, and it's fantastic, for me. And I, just to tie into something that Tom was mentioning before we started recording. I think I've been going for 40 years. 40 years. 40. Because
oh my God.
I used to be
pre-digital
when it was really the Retail Federation, and I was a manager of Bloomingdale's back then. So it was a very, very different world, very, very different kind of event where we'd talk about store displays and whatever. And now it's all tech. Everything is tech. Just so our listeners hear this, because I think it's really remarkable. Google, Amazon, Microsoft, all these players, of course, have big displays and they're advertising all their technologies at events like this. The display for Microsoft, the booth for them, was larger than my house. That's how big this display was. They took off the entire entryway to the conference. It was just a remarkable thing with all of their different showcases for tech and salespeople and whatnot. It was
the amount of money they have too. I mean, speaking of display, I feel like it's all going to be like augmented reality tech, or you know what I mean? It's probably all
there's robots everywhere, holograms everywhere. It was kind of bizarre in a way, but anyway, did that. And I want to just give a couple quick shout outs before we dive in, and also leave a moment for our sponsor mentions. So I saw so many people at NRF. They were fantastic. I won't try to cover them all, but I do want to mention one guy in particular named Phil Weiland, who is retiring after many decades of this major data firm. They were one of the first players to aggregate, customer data in really interesting ways and start publishing reports and work with clients on that. He's retiring after an amazing career. So hi to Phil. He listens to our podcast. So I want to just make sure everyone knows that.
I've got one for you that, Tim, you might have already mentioned him. I can't remember all the shout outs, but
sure,
he had messaged me on LinkedIn and I missed it because how there's so much spam.
Oh, yeah.
So I somehow found him because someone had said, "Hey, have you been talking to this company?" I looked him up and then it turned out he had messaged me, even though and so it was actually Balance that was talking to me about them, our sponsor. So it's Ray De Verano from Relight Depot. And he said, and so he runs a BigCommerce site. And he's been listening to every single episode, he said. It's been helping him. He said it's been helping him run, he's still a small B2B business, but he's growing and,
That's great to hear. I mean, I that's the reason that I want to, for us to continue to do these shout outs and to continue to have a great thing. I have two other quick people. One is Ray Hennessy, who's also a listener of many, many episodes, and Cynthia Guang, who runs a digital PR agency out in California. She listens to our podcast instead of her employees. So I want to thank everyone.
Tell her we need some more PR. So
we need some more PR. I'm going to just hello, Cynthia. I will see what we could do about that. But thank you to all of them. And then let me pause for one moment for our folks to insert our sponsor mentions, and then we'll kick off in the podcast. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com. Book a session and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance. Isaiah, please introduce our guest.
Yeah, I'm extremely excited to introduce Tom Pierce. It sounds like you're, I hope I'm not saying this wrong, 40-year founder of I2S Integrated Information Systems. Is that 40 years of the business or 40 years in the career?
40 years in the career. The business celebrated its 30th anniversary
Okay.
this summer. So
Only 30. Sorry.
only 30. 10 years trying to work for somebody else until I figured, no, I need to strike out on my own.
So what is or do you go by IIS or I2S?
I2S,
yeah,
Integrated
I2S.
Information Systems, is a mouthful. So we I2S. Doesn't work so well in handwriting. We've gotten letters addressed to 125 and all kinds of things. So
That's funny.
Yeah, you probably didn't think about all the things that would happen in 30 years with the name.
We did not. As a matter of fact, the first time that the idea came to mind to get the URL, i2s.com, I get in a bidding war, and I started my company with $5,000 in cash and didn't want to spend all of it on the URL. So we're at i2s.us, much cheaper.
You gotta check for our .io now or .ai.
We went with the .cc, Cocoa Islands. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
We're actually .co, so we've been stuck with the .co, Trellis.co. We just felt like, hey, these .co, it's simple. Hopefully it'll catch on. Some of these are sort of catching on, but not quite the level of adoption we were hoping for. We have the same issue. .com is like long gone, and it's not even, they didn't even respond. We didn't even get in a bidding war. They won't even respond because that's how much they don't even care to respond. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your background and just so people understand you a little bit better.
Sure. Probably the easiest two words to kind of capture who I am and how the career developed. I'm a mathematician whose primarily interest is analysis. Math background, math major, but started getting interested in computers as they started to appear. My only formal computer education was in 8th grade, when my high school got a computer donated. Went to school in Knoxville, Tennessee, near Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So that whole era, there were some pretty bright people in the community. And our math teacher had never seen a computer before. So two of us 8th graders kind of dug in, and one of my classmates really got fascinated by the hardware. I didn't. I really got fascinated by the software. So this was flipping switches. We loved it when we could actually say what we had done on paper tape.
Was this like an Apple E2, like early Apple before that? IBM? What is this, IBM then? Or
the computer filled a room.
Oh my God.
They had to cut the bathroom in half, build a floor, build the ceiling, build the air conditioning. Right. No, I was already in the industry before PCs came out.
Wow.
I started, the first time I actually used a computer professionally, right out of college. I was going through my Army training. And my boss just happened to have a desktop computer, HP 9845 with a desk cover on it. The only reason anybody had ever used it was to print briefing slides. Yep. That was it. They had some software and a plotter. That was the original robot, I guess. Pin up, pin down, pin left, pin right. So I was given the challenge to do some analysis of missile maintenance logistics and then later ammunition logistics. And one of the most fascinating things I did in about a 3-week period is I did the simulation model, but I needed a way to give the output. And so I plugged in the plotter, and I reached back into my trigonometry background, and I had it plot the results of the simulation in a 3D chart. I got a commendation medal, my boss, his boss, his boss, his boss, over the results of that analysis, because it was, I was young, naive, I was just using the math I had learned. I didn't know nobody else was doing it. It was just fun. To me, it was in the same category the first time Radio Shack introduced their computer, the TRS-80, I think it was. I was there when the doors opened. I went in, sat down, grabbed a, tried to figure out how to get, there's no Windows graphical user interface. Your prompt is an angle bracket. And I just started experimenting with the commands. And by the time I got up, it was because the store was closing. Mm-hmm. And I was so fascinated. My girlfriend wasn't very happy because I missed a date, but I have always been fascinated with the problems that could be solved with computers. And so, my first serious simulation modeling in the Army, there was a gentleman. Of course, we use the word spreadsheet all the time. People don't understand why we call it that. He had the old classroom table, 4 foot by 8 foot table with the pine legs, and a piece of lined paper filling the entire tabletop, a set of pencils, pencil sharpeners, and
I remember I used stuff like that when I was a kid.
That's what a spreadsheet was.
Yeah.
I looked at how hard that was for him. I told him I thought I could make his job simpler by automating some of it with HP Basic Language on that desktop computer. He was highly suspicious, right?
Pre Microsoft Excel, and this is,
Oh, I had pre Lotus, all of that.
You could have literally been Bill Gates, you could have.
Oh gosh, well, yeah. I mean, I was at it before he was, but
No, it's funny to get nostalgic about that stuff.
You had the idea, right? I mean, kind of.
I wrote a spreadsheet program that we actually demonstrated to the U.S. Army at very high levels pre Excel, but his is better and worse, and I love it and couldn't live without it and hate it and wish I could get people to quit using it.
Yeah. Wrongly. Now we're deep into like Google Data Studio feeding into Streets. It's all it's beyond.
So I should cut in and mention one aside because you mentioned Lotus. One of the listeners to this podcast is the guy behind Lotus 123. Wow. David Reed. There's a thing called Reed's Law. Which you may know, and David Reed listens to this podcast. So hello, David.
And Timothy, I hope you don't mind me saying so, but it's comforting to my soul to talk to people roughly my age. Anytime you see giant breakthroughs, this will happen again 30 years from now, 30 years from now.
Yeah.
Anytime there is a major generational shift in any kind of advance, the learning path of a founder is completely different from the learning path of those who inherit that technology and do new things with it.
Yeah. I just want to add, one of the luck that I had is I just happened to be born at the right time of getting very early high-speed internet access.
Yep.
So my mom didn't have it right away with my dad. Their parents were divorced, and I had, by first, second grade, I was using high-speed internet on Windows 95, Windows 98, and that leap from like Windows to Windows 95, 98 was just such a massive leap. That I was able to.
Windows 95, you survived it, but okay.
But at the time, it was like revolutionary, right? And you were able to do so much, and I was so young, but I was able to I felt like I got like a leap ahead of most people,
You sound like you're quoting Malcolm Gladwell from Outliers, that the age at which you were born has a tremendous influence on what's easy for you.
Yeah. I mean, I remember playing real-time strategy games in like third grade. Think about that. Probably not many people in like second or third grade are playing like pretty advanced video games on the internet,
exactly. And yet
teaching yourself too.
My 4-year-old grandson can navigate a computer game easily.
Now they can, but now they're all going to be experts and crush us all. But for me at that time, that was pretty unique, Anyways, I'd love to there's probably a million more amazing stories, but if we fast forward to now, and you obviously got into enterprise software, ERP, and is that kind of your core focus now, more of the back office manufacturing, distribution, or where? Obviously you probably still do some defense related.
No, it's almost all of my business. 95, 98% of my business is still defense industry. and I am still a mathematician and an analyst.
Okay.
But if I had to kind of like mention the four pillars of what really makes up what I would call enterprise software, right? You've got the data collection itself, and which, you know, there's just this huge boom in user experience. I think you were mentioning that, but you know, before we
You mean like a
taping.
snowflake, or you kind of look at like a
No, data collection. People that
Okay.
used to have to fill out forms with pencil and paper now type data into a computer. The data has to get from a human
Oh,
mind
okay,
into
gotcha.
a computer somehow.
Okay.
And you know, sometimes it's sensors and it's all kinds of. So the data collection industry just exploded about the same time the gaming industry exploded.
Yep.
But once you've collected it, now what are you going to do with it? Well, let's just go store it in a warehouse and get all concerned about cybersecurity and make sure nobody ever reads it. Well, that's a really good idea. It's a really bad idea. And yet that is the direction the industry's gone because of all of the concerns about, do you have a need to know or right to know? So you get the transparency issues, you get the trustworthiness issues, you get the insert human deception here. Then you move into the data processing side, which is where me as an analyst, loved. So go collect all of the data you have about inventory and orders and capacity and employee labor. Now let me have that data and let me go crunch it. Let me do stuff with it. Sure. Let me turn it into analytical models, simulation. What if? How do we improve? How do we identify variance in cost and schedule, risk and opportunity? How do you balance and quantify? How do you inform high-level management with the data you have? One of the best compliments I've ever gotten from a high-level person in the defense industry told me, everybody else gives me data, you give me information. That means so much to me. That raw data, ones and zeros, it's the equivalent of somebody finding the Dead Sea Scrolls and having no idea how to read it. Congratulations, you have them. What do they mean? And the number of layers that go between collecting these mountains of data, and now it's not just ones and zeros, but it's video and documents and all
images.
What do they mean? Well, there is a ton of data processing that goes on under the covers. Some people, oh, there's algorithms in Facebook. Yeah, there are, but that's not like a math formula. There are very sophisticated models that are working under the covers that very few people even have. I don't think most humans have the mental capacity to grasp more than a very narrow slice of the processing that happens. And then you get to the output and presentation of that information, which again has been another huge boon. Oh, I've got all this data. Oh, I can present it to you in 4-panel charts and graphs that are interactive and dynamic.
So you'd kind of consider that the presentation layer, or that kind of
presentation layer to me is the third.
Third.
The fourth is hooking them together.
Integrations.
Because what is output from one system is input to the next system. We have a system of systems.
So integration layer, kind of like in that.
And that's truly, I mean, in my mind, that's infinite. You hear an awful lot of people talk about supply chain, but very people really mean it. And we were talking earlier, I now have 7 grandchildren. Wow. And the way a grandfather interacts with a grandchild is a completely different category than parent to child. And so when a business talks about supplier relationships, that's parent to child. That supplier has suppliers. And if you really want to thrive in the supply world, you will understand not only your suppliers, but their suppliers and their suppliers. One of my smaller clients is a supplier to my larger client. And we got into this conversation about how the big client, the big bully that's got a lot of money and pushes people around, just kept demanding to know a promise date of a machine part that they were doing. Well, they couldn't provide a promise date because their supplier couldn't provide a promise date.
So the second order, third order, I mean, it's the same issue we have. It's like, I want a date on our project, but we don't have a final scope. How can I give you a final date when we don't have a final scope? I can estimate a date, like.
And just to give you just a sense of the complexity, the defense customer that I have for most of my business builds a very complex weapon system that has 40,000 components.
Wow.
And that entails about 700 or 800 major suppliers.
Okay.
And we've even done math and analysis of where these suppliers are located so that we can present data to House and Senate appropriations committees about the impact of funding the top client on all of the sub tiers. And to put that on a slightly smaller scale, I recently moved. I live in Shelbyville, Kentucky now, work in Louisville, used to live in Georgetown, Kentucky, where there's a major Toyota plant. That entire small town of Georgetown, Kentucky, just north of Lexington, is full of Toyota employees, employees of companies that provide to Toyota, employees of companies that provide to the companies that provide to Toyota.
It's all the layers. Yeah.
If Toyota left,
Yeah.
ton of businesses, and we've seen deserted communities, all the way down to the bars, restaurants, and churches that start emptying out because of all of the infrastructure. So if you really want to say you understand your supply chain, understand the chain. But what I don't hear talked about as much is the demand chain. So I have a customer, machine shop, another customer that's a paint shop, both of whom supply a defense manufacturing industry, who supplies agencies of the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Army, who supply troops. There is a chain, and not everybody's telling the truth at every link of the chain of what is the true need. So this is really tricky in any business. What do you want to do? Do you want to make your client happy, or do you want to make your client's client happy? And if you can get the transparency to see the true source of the demand and see through all of the layers of arbitrariness in between, who really needs this thing? And
I just want to bring up something connected to this whole picture that you're building, because so I know you probably can't name these folks, but I have a lot of connections to Raytheon, for example.
That's the one.
And Raytheon has the primary, secondary, tertiary kind of connections kind of mapped out, meaning essentially to fill out your story. It's like, well, primary suppliers and the suppliers to the suppliers and the supplier, you keep going out in that way. And it builds up this kind of ecosystem,
exactly,
right, that works in one way very well, generally, to Raytheon. In the other direction, so they're not just supplying exclusively. So the suppliers are supplying to all these other people, have other customers, right?
Exactly.
And that becomes this multi-layered, very complex thing where you build up a community. And Isaiah knows this because he's from Massachusetts, but let's say around Andover or around Lexington, Massachusetts, or wherever, where there are these concentrations of defense and biotech companies, right? But if you're supplying to people who aren't there, maybe they're sending them to Lexington, Kentucky, right?
Right.
It becomes this whole other model that you have to work with. It's like, well, here's the primary, and we can model that. But then what about the secondary and the tertiary and all these other?
You're exactly right. And I think you just hinted at that there are actually two parallel networks. There is we'll go ahead and call it a digital network or a logistical network, the data flowing and the parts flowing. But there's just as complex, if not more complex, a human network. Human to human relationships really are still driving. Why do you do business with them? Because I know them, because I trust them.
Yep.
There's the advantage of incumbency. When you get a foot in the door as a supplier, you don't have to have it a non-compete contractually. It is just easier to do what you've done before, as long as
especially the bigger the company, right? The bigger the company, all the way up to the government. Like the hardest contracts, in my opinion, to get out of the government because it's so much procurement crap. And so the larger the companies, the more annoying it is to go through procurement, and the less likely they're going to change because they know it's annoying to change. I mean, I think we talked to one, Fortune 100 company, and they were like, we want to hire you, but we're not allowed to go outside of our supplier network.
Exactly.
Like they knew we would do a better job because we're nimble and faster, but they just weren't allowed to.
And the resistance to change is as much a psychological problem as it is a technical problem.
Oh, for sure.
And on both ends of it, be careful what you wish for. Because if, like me, you end up with one client that represents 80% of your business, if something happens to that client, your business is at risk. I was at a conference in Orlando, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, and it was unbelievable the number of people in this particular roundtable forum whose businesses had been put at great risk because they took one as their primary client.
Yeah.
A Walmart or a Target or an Amazon.
And then they get fired, and then they scramble. And
well,
I've been very lucky to work hard, and just, part of it was luck, but part of it was strategic, where we've just never had that issue, thank God. But to be honest, I want that problem. I want to get a monster client right now, but because we have the bandwidth. But
be careful,
right? But to Tom's point, it's incredibly risky. There was an agency that I worked with some time ago, and we had one client that paid us over $100,000 a month on contract, and we did that for years. That client. And that's a huge amount of money to depend on, right?
And then you lose it, and you have to fire a whole team, right? Like then you're
the
probably
whole team
lose
had to
five or 7 people or 10 people. Depends on
when it ended, it was like,
And
that was a huge shock in a way. It's like, well, what are you going to do? But you have to plan around that.
And in order to keep that client, right, you have to design your business to fit their demands.
For sure. You need a large team to support a big client like that. You can't just have like one person managing.
And if they want you to cut costs, you
mentioned Walmart and Target and whatever, people who are in CPG, they are hit with this over and over and over again. They have to have a certain pack and a certain type of labeling and a certain whatever for Costco, right? And if you get into Costco, and then, one of these, you really can only do that because you can't afford to do anything else.
Exactly. And I don't want to make this sound too nefarious. It's very natural and understandable. But, you get some of these major themes, lean manufacturing, whatever you want to call it, reduce your carrying cost of inventory. Well, the primary tactic that so many of the very large companies use to minimize their inventory carrying cost is to push that burden down to their supplier. We want you to build a warehouse across the street from our retail where you keep a year's worth of inventory so we don't have to. Somebody's going to carry that burden. And so congratulations, you're lean. Well, not if you take the whole ecosystem into account. And that's where I think we really get into, not only the supply chain problems of the pandemic, but even going back to the Great Recession 2008, that the whole theory of just in time, and we're going to tell you what we want, and it's going to be delivered the next day. Really? How are you going to do that if there's a blockade in the Suez Canal?
It's funny because people always ask me, we want delivery dates on our product page, and I'm like, there's a lot of different ways to do that, but usually the problem is not that we can't do it. It's where's the data going to come from? Is it going to come from your ERP? Is it accurate in your ERP?
Exactly.
Is it, and then even if can we get the API in real time? So I want to bring up 2 things. One is way off topic of B2B e-commerce, but I think you'll find it interesting, and then we'll come back to the actual podcast goal. But I was similar to you, I was a math guy, but I was thinking about getting my PhD in economics. That's what I really like, and but obviously didn't go that route. But I also had a degree in psychology. I did both economics and psychology because, to your point, a lot of the problems are psychological problems, even in economics, right? Like some things are obvious financially, but it's getting people to do stuff that's actually not so simple, right? And so incentivizing change and behavior. And I think that you bring up a really important point. I'm going to get like very meta here, whatever you want to call it. But I go back and forth, sometimes I feel like, the capitalist model really does work and it's great. And we see the problems with socialism and communism, and then vice versa. You see the wealth and inequality with capitalism. And I think that the reality is there's not it's not an either or solution, and there is no solution that's just one or the other perfectly, because it's kind of the game theory problem. Are you familiar with game theory?
Exactly.
It's the game theory problem, and I think we're seeing that play out at like this massive scale in the world, where what you're talking about with these incumbents, and it's like, oh yeah, just go start it. Like, hey, it's go start a company. Like, why can't you just become rich? Because you can go start a company and compete with Raytheon or whatever, Walmart. But that incumbent problem is so much bigger than people realize. Like, I'm 100% positive that as an agency, Trellis, our processes are great. I've been doing this for 12 years. I can do a better job than like probably 99% of my competitors for a certain size of project. But the procurement process to go get those accounts is so difficult that I'm going up against Infosys and Accenture. And so this idea that we live in this perfect competition world is just not really true because of the economy of scale issue, which is why you never really see many new, like Tesla is one of the very few rare major new manufacturers. Like, how many major new manufacturing, I think, is probably the ultimate example of barrier to entry and complexity at scale, right? Like, how many major new manufacturers are there in the last 20 years that you can think of? They're almost all second, third order distributor. Like, they're not the raw materials, because it's just so hard to go and get those scale accounts. And I'm not advocating for communism or socialism either. There's a problem there, and you have corruption, and it's I think that people oversimplify this problem as if like, oh, like just let's deregulate everything and it'll be fine. It's like, you're going to create a whole new set of problems when you do that. You
are correct. You end up moving the problem.
Yes.
In fact, one of my sort of favorite, I don't know, frivolous topics is the problem of AI, right? We've been talking about AI since I was in high school. I don't know, different names, different concepts, everything else.
Of course,
But shocked people were when they started having, some AI, ChatGPT or something, write a term paper only to discover that it sometimes lies. Well, how did it learn how to lie?
Yeah.
Well, from whom did it learn?
Yeah. What data and what was the data and what was the programming? And I mean,
the problem of evil doesn't go away, it moves.
Yeah.
I love that it's called hallucination
and trustworthiness. Go ahead.
Wait, what is that?
I love that it's called hallucination. That's my favorite.
Is that what they're calling it? I've never heard this.
When there's like incorrect information in like an AI, result.
They're calling it hallucination. They always come up with these words to make it sound not as bad as it is.
Yeah.
But it's actually way scarier than hallucination when you think about it.
I mean, the
like,
example,
I don't want to hallucinate my plane crashing because the AI failed. You know what I mean? Like,
the example that I gave to people that fascinates me is that I use ChatGPT just like everybody else does. I play with it and try to figure it out and see what I could use it for. And I put in biographical data, sources of data, all of the ways in which people do this to prompt to write about me. And only about 50% of it was right, because it kept finding all of these other things and went off like on tangents. It's like, what? I didn't ever have that job.
What's so crazy about that is that, it's in Ecclesiastes, one of the oldest sacred texts we have. There is nothing new under the sun. There's a great story I was introduced to in high school that this president of a medical school gave the commencement address and began like this. I've got two things I need to admit to you. The first thing is half of what you've learned in medical school is wrong. The other thing I need to tell you is we don't know which half. So if you're not ready to deal with the fact that an awful lot of the information that has been collected is inaccurate and not trustworthy, it really doesn't matter whether you're talking human systems or digital systems, and
especially social data or social indicators or surveys or these subjective indicators that are
think of it is hard data of, I've got a purchase order and a quantity and a unit price. I should be able to compute the extended price, etc. except that there's this little code on the PO, if they remembered to mark it, that says this is still under negotiation. We wanted to give them a 75%. So no, that's not the real price.
And then they're like, Isaiah, we want you to do real-time pricing on the website. And I'm like, you know, we could do that, but is it going to work, or is it going to, like, you know?
And you know, we talked about Excel earlier. I mean, one of the reasons people gravitate back to Excel is because it is so easy, whichever your incentive is, it is so easy to either correct data you know to be wrong or manipulate data that you would prefer not to be seen. Excel has no idea whether you are improving or degrading the accuracy and precision of the data, but it's easy to change. So back in the day, right, in the old days, when with those desktop computers with dust covers, the Army and the Defense Department, everybody started talking about in technology insertion. We've got human processes that work more or less, and we're going to insert technology in the right places to make it better. Now, the problem is the same problem is just switched. Now we've got primarily digital processes, and we're trying to figure out where do we insert human intelligence in a way that makes it better, not worse.
Yeah.
And I joke with people about the flow chart that says insert human deception here. You know, if you don't really want that data to go all the way up to the shareholders of the SEC or wherever it's going, I'm not talking about anybody in particular, but truthfulness and trustworthiness of information is not a new problem.
That's why I hate the word misinformation. I think it's like the stupidest, because I think that what's actually true is not as simple as you think. And so most things are just, we're kind of sure, right? Like most things are, we think, but we're not like 100% certain. So it's really not always such a yes or no. Most things are not a yes or no.
And the degree of certainty is something that is so naturally human, even to a 4-year-old, right? That with your tone of voice or any kind of way you can express a degree of certainty that just can't be captured in a digital input, not easily, right?
Yeah.
How much is this going to cost? About $5. But if I said $5.12, you would not feel like the same way as you felt when I said about $5. This is part of what's behind the whole 2 + 2 + 5 thing, right? If it's 2.4 miles to the grocery store and you ask me how far is it, I'm going to say about 2 miles. And then you ask me how long is the round trip? About 5 miles. Well, that didn't make any sense. Sure, it does. I'm rounding. Intuitively, instinctively, always. We don't.
What is pi, right? Pi is an infinite rounding. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's 3.14, 159. Where do you? Yeah. How much accuracy do you need?
To make a decision.
I think that part of, I think, Isaiah, you both have hit something that's kind of interesting about this, because we almost never talk about like misinformation or like about the truth of things on this podcast. But you know, I always make the distinction about disinformation as the problem. You know, when people are using information as propaganda, claiming that it has like all of this.
That's a better way to think about it. That's the bigger issue, is
and that's the bigger
misleading information or whatever. You know,
now there's a third one.
Yeah.
Called malinformation.
Yes.
And that's telling the truth when you shouldn't.
Yeah. You mean lying, or I don't know. Yeah. Well, so I want to tie it back to B2B e-commerce, and hopefully people have listened all the way to this point. That
I think they have.
They haven't given up. But what you said is funny, because you basically described why we're passionate about B2B e-commerce, because when you really break it down, the collection of data in B2B needs to get better through just simple automation. Most of this is still analog. They're taking calls, they're going in and punching it in a screen. You don't know if they did it accurately until they email you back, and they probably messed up the friggin' thing they took over the phone, or it's a lot of analog information. But obviously most of this can be digitized or automated through e-commerce, or, you know, variations of e-commerce, because I think e-commerce is almost a bad way to think about things. It's commerce, digital commerce, right? So we can automate the collection of data better. We can process it better with new tools. One thing that I find is interesting is that I'm starting to notice that the companies that are better at B2B e-commerce typically are the companies that are also better at ERP. So people think, oh, it's an e-commerce problem, but it's really more of like a data automation problem. And if you're not good at ERP and processing data at that level, you're probably not going to be very good at e-commerce either. You know what I mean? Like that.
Let me
Yeah.
piggyback and go one level further. In total agreement, let me go one level further. And I'm going to pick on SAP just because the
Yeah, I
growth
mean,
movement, right?
I think that's
So
totally fair. Hopefully they're not your customer and we don't get yelled at, but
thank you. So for about a decade or so, the tagline of most of their marketing was the best run companies run SAP. I have my own very contrarian paraphrase of that. Only the best.
I'm laughing because I'm not sure I've ever seen that.
It's
in
over.
my
Experience.
It was around
experience,
for
I don't
years,
think
yeah.
that's
My own very contrarian, sue me for libel if you need to, but my own contrarian paraphrase of that is only the best run companies can survive SAP.
I
The
heard that companies
discipline,
go bankrupt upgrading in some cases.
absolutely, absolutely. Because improving the technology won't improve the discipline of your personnel.
Yeah.
Or the knowledge or the skill or the experience. Humans are not interchangeable parts no matter what software tools you give them.
Yeah.
And there's even this sort of dependency problem, right? I remember the first time I went into a fast food store, Burger King, and wanted a hamburger, but their computers were down. What the price of a hamburger is 50 cents. I have 50 cents. There's 60% sales tax. I have 6 cents. Will you give me a hamburger? They couldn't. Not only couldn't they process it, but the cashiers didn't know how to give change because they relied on the cash register to tell them how much change to give. We have got so vast dependency on automation to do our thinking for us that our ability to do things without automation or without trustworthy automation, when the power goes out.
Yeah.
Can you still do what you need to do when the computers go out? Can you pull out a stack of number 2 pencils and legal pads and still keep track of things? Guys, Tim's age and my age can. I don't know about our kids.
The example that, and I have a similar example, and I don't know if I've ever told our listeners this. So years ago, when I was still doing retail management, we had a huge power outage and our security systems got messed up, and I was at Macy's and whatever, big issue, huge. And the registers wouldn't work properly. But here, the biggest issue for us was that, we had a lot of people paid cash, and I was at a big location at that point. And we had millions of dollars in cash that couldn't be counted by the counters, but it had to leave the building. And so we're like, what do we do? So we had locked people in a room with like armed security guards, and we sat on the floor and counted millions of dollars to put it in the bags so the Brinks could pick it up and take it. Otherwise, it's like, but we had to count it by hand. It's like, and it really was the most bizarre experience, but it was like a tech failure. And everyone's like, what do we do? It's money. We don't know what to do. It's like, well, we're going to count it. We're going to count the money.
It's funny how scary, like we are relying on all this stuff that like a couple failures and like society would just break down. Right. But that's a whole different, what should be a separate podcast.
That's a separate podcast. We'll do that.
How brittle society is. But I think what you're saying is I want to make one point though, because it's funny what you said. And my experience, and you guys can take this with a grain of salt, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but we're more on the e-com side. We do a lot with the ERPs, but we're not ERP partners. The companies that I see at a very high level, and obviously there's always exceptions and whatever, that seem to be running pretty well that I've seen run 3 ERPs in general. And there's, like I said, I'm sure there's examples of other ones are Microsoft Dynamics, Infor, and NetSuite. I found that those companies, on average, more so than other ERPs, seem to run a little bit better because they're all moving to the cloud. Well, obviously, Infor is now moving to the cloud. Not that there's problems with that, but they're getting more ingrained into the cloud. Microsoft's making a big push. So, like, you're going to have to move to the cloud on Microsoft soon. I mean, everything's going to move to the cloud, like with these ERPs. But in general, I find for whatever reason, they seem to be a little more ahead of the curve with using the technology than some of the other ERPs.
Three comments. I'm familiar with InfoSuite's business model, winter presentation. They're incrementalist, and I love it.
Infor.
Yeah. NetSuite, forgive me.
Yeah, NetSuite.
They were incrementalists from the beginning.
Well, it's Oracle, but Oracle bought them. It is Oracle,
right.
But yeah.
Microsoft Dynamics. I've got my concerns with Microsoft Dynamics similar that I have with Excel, Access, every other Microsoft product.
Yeah.
It is very easy to use it badly.
Yeah.
And
I think that's because it's very customizable, and it's like this.
It is.
Yeah, it's very.
But if you don't have a really good guide on how to use it,
you can go wrong.
Really
but that's why I think that generally what I see the companies that use it are a little bit smarter because they've selected it because they are taking advantage of the complexity of what it has to offer. But to your point, that's a double-edged sword. It can go badly.
I'm also hearing really good things about QAD.
Okay.
A more recent.
We're not in that world as much, so I just don't see it too often. That's why I have my own biases of kind of traditional distribution things. Yeah.
One of the things that actually came out of my seminary education was this process, and I had a 72-year-old professor talking about the process of institutionalization. And the whole technology industry is about my age, and what happens over time is things ossify, and the larger and the more complex, the less flexible and the less adaptable. So the giants of tech industry have become the aircraft carriers that are difficult to turn.
Oh, for sure. And
I mean,
that's why Oracle had to buy NetSuite. I mean, I think one of the smartest things if Oracle hadn't bought NetSuite, I mean, they would be struggling. Honestly, they would be really struggling. As a company, that's their flagship product from what I've seen. I
really didn't realize it had been that big a.
It's
shot in the arm, but it makes sense.
NetSuite, the conference is massive. I mean, that's where we see the most adoption because mid-market, small business.
At this point, I think you're right.
That's where a lot of the adoption is because it's so cheap and it's easy to get up and running relative to most.
Now I got to throw in one more comment about the cloud. That moving to the cloud is another example, neither positive nor negative, of moving a problem.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't want the problem of systems administration on your own facility? Fine, move it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Pay somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
It's still difficult.
Yeah.
It's still expensive.
Well, what we find with that is that you have different limitations, right? You now have to abide by the limitations of what's offered in the cloud, right? And so you might have limitations of what the APIs can do, and you don't have full access to the system. And, so
about 2 years ago, I was bored over the holidays and decided I would just try my hand at spinning up a Amazon Web Service. And in order to recreate what I already had on premises, I had to spin up 7 independent servers and figure out how to make them talk to each other.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these cloud ERPs don't even have all the features from the on-premise. So they're making you upgrade, but then you're losing features, or you have to figure out how to recreate features that don't exist. And
they don't have the maturity.
Yeah.
And I do not know a shortcut to maturity.
No. Well, that's why I know a lot of people delaying it, which is kind of smart. They're waiting. I think by like 25, 26, it'll pretty much be caught up for the most part, with some minor issues but that's my estimate at this point.
Let's see, Isaiah, I spent 30 years taking an MRP system that was written by Boeing and improving it every day for 30 years.
Okay.
How long do you think it's going to take me to replicate that on a cloud ERP system?
I'm more talking Infor, Microsoft, these guys they're pretty deep into it.
But Tom, we're going to have the AI do it.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
That's right. Yeah. That's what we're going to do. We'll just push you aside and AI will do it.
Yeah. Everything will get better over time, but also degrade.
So, I mean, Tim, I know you got to go relatively soon, and this was really interesting because I feel like we went a different direction, but I hope like people, it gets you thinking, right? And I think that some part of the point of the podcast is that, like, you know, you can come here for little tactics and, you know, should you do grid ordering on your presentation layer to make it a better buying experience? Like, to be honest, that's sometimes the easy part. The hard part is building a culture that can like adapt to these things,
Yep.
right? And you have to kind of think sometimes abstractly and the larger the organization, the harder it is to do that, you know. But
let me throw out a question to ponder. You hear a lot about change management as if that's the reason that technology isn't being adapted well.
yeah.
I think we used to call that leadership. I'm not quite
All
sure
right,
what
that's
to
good. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that. I'll
Well,
remember to credit you, but I'm going to use that. That's very good.
Not to be ageist, you know, obviously I'm the youngest guy on this podcast by a long shot, but I do feel like one of the problems that's exacerbating B2B e-commerce is that a lot of these, you know, B2B manufacturer distributor companies are run by people that they're not digital natives, and they don't have the level of background that you guys have, which, you know, you guys are working on computers in the 80s and, you know, deep technology backgrounds. That's very rare that I see leadership at these mid to larger companies with that kind of level of experience. And so they're so far removed from how the technology works. They're just like, okay, let's throw some money at it, hire a vendor, and like,
I
you know
do
what I mean?
think
Like,
that will change in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
I
think
agree.
we'll see
I agree.
people moving into senior executive positions that grew up with computers.
I agree. I agree. But it's not just about growing up with computers. It's also about being able to map, to your point, mapping the technology with the people and creating this, like, you know, combination that makes sense. Because sometimes adding technology is just another annoying process that doesn't actually solve anything, you know?
Well, you know, and I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but one of the things that I spoke with a client about was that, you know, one of the issues was that people coming out of business school who ended up being in the C-suite, you know, it was business school. It wasn't tech school. It wasn't computer science school. You know,
it's too high level. It's too theoretical.
It was too theoretical, but now that's
Yeah.
not true anymore in most B school programs, right? They're really grounding people in a lot of, you know, at least awareness of what's happening in the world. But that, you know, most of the people are still like at the top didn't understand that, right? They didn't know that. That wasn't part of their background.
Yeah, my problem with the B school stuff is they need like a deeper background in technology and marketing.
They do.
Right? Yeah.
They absolutely do.
The same thing's true on the other side, though, right? People that seek a technology career that have no experience
I know what you're saying.
where their technology is being used are just as dangerous.
Well, they also underestimate how the average user behaves, right? They assume that, oh, if I build this crazy complicated thing, everyone's going to love it because he loves it. It's like, yeah, you're the guy that tinkers on, you know, building your own custom computer. That's not the user. That's not what the user is going to do. You know, the user wants to fill out a simple form that's automated with AI and it just autofills for you. Like, how nice is it when you get the autofill and it works? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. So we should give the last word to you, Tom, as we get ready to wrap up here. So what do you want our listeners to hear about you and your work and anything else?
Wow. So I'll be honest with you. I'm at the point in my career where the thing I'm most interested in is what knowledge, wisdom, experience survives, what endures, what value endures to the next generation. So yeah, sure, I'm still trying to grow my business, you know, contact me, email me, I'll see if I can help you. But the main thing I want people to understand is that you know, what happens between your ears is not obsolete. You still need to think. You still need to understand. Whatever technology you're embracing, don't delegate responsibility for the decision making to a machine. Use the machine if you understand what it's doing and you can sense whether or not it's being helpful, then go for it. Use it to great advantage, but never stop thinking about what it's doing. And what well-informed leaders make better decisions. Make sure you are informing leaders well.
No, thank you for that. That's great. That's great. I appreciate it.
We need better leadership everywhere.
We need better informed leaders.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you so much. Really,
Immensely. Thank you for the
yeah.
invitation.
We're gonna have to have you back, honestly, because
I think we will.
I don't think we can go so much deeper into some things that.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Been
Tom.
enjoyed, sir.